Hey, you guys, how are you? I'm going to wait a couple of minutes and give people time to pop into the webinar. So we're going to get started about 6:02. So I'm just going to kind of hang around for a second, see who hops on, and then we'll get started. Okay, so it looks like some people are joining. That is exciting. If you don't mind, I would love for you to tell me in the chat or in the comments where you're from, where you're joining the webinar from. I think it's always so fun to see where everybody is. So if you'll start putting those in the chat, that'll give us something to talk about for a couple of minutes until we're ready to get started. I'm not a fan of awkward silence, but I'm going to give it a little bit of time before we get started. You guys, if you'll tell me in the chat where you're from, maybe what you hope to learn tonight, that would be awesome. I'm so excited that you guys are here. Okay, so New Jersey, Ohio, Texas, lots of Texas. That's awesome. I'm sure some of you can tell from my accent. That is definitely where I'm at. Denver. Perfect. Hey, Mary Jo, how are you? Excited that you're here. Kristen, Annie, it's good to see you. Diane, Rachel, Amber. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited that you guys are all here. So if you're just hopping on, we're kind of introducing ourselves in the chat. Some of you are watching on Facebook, some of you are watching on YouTube. Wherever you're watching from, I am just excited that you've decided to hop on. I am going to make this as quick as I can because I know we all have things to do this evening. Also, tonight is not Big Brother, it's Survivor and The Amazing Race, which is kind of my jam. I'm definitely not going to miss those. So any other reality show fans in the house, we are definitely going to finish in time to watch those. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. We're going to be talking about differentiation tonight, and this is a big conversation. I think mostly because it's something that can feel really overwhelming. Let me see if I can get to my slides. Here we go. It's something that can feel really overwhelming, and I think sometimes we make it harder than it is. And I'm not suggesting that it's easy, but my hope is that tonight I'll be able to give you some really practical strategies to help you think about it a little bit differently and maybe just make it a little bit more manageable and a little bit more meaningful. So as we get started, that's kind of my goal. And Lauren, I'm excited to see that you are ready to learn about differentiation. And I think so often when we just hear the word differentiation, gifted learners are not the ones that come to mind, right? We think about differentiating for our struggling learners, which there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if we only think about our struggling learners, we're missing an opportunity to get our gifted learners or our advanced learners, our high achievers to that depth of understanding that they're capable of gaining if they're just given the opportunity. So as we go through, we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to kind of, if you've ever been to my presentations before, you know, I kind of operate big picture first, and then we funnel down into the practical strategies. And that's exactly what we're going to do this evening. So if you haven't heard me share before, I want to make sure that you guys are aware of my core beliefs and what they are. These are the things that I believe to be true for all of our learners, not just gifted learners, but this is really, really important to me. And I never want to start a presentation without being really clear about this. So first of all, I believe that every learner deserves an opportunity to experience new learning every single day. That means that I don't think any kid should have to sit through something that they already know. I believe that every learner deserves an opportunity to learn from productive struggle, which if we're not differentiating, it's possible that our gifted learners and advanced learners may never get the experience of productive struggle, which is really unfortunate because if they graduate without having experienced productive struggle, we're setting them up for a situation that is probably not going to be good. Number three, I believe that every learner deserves an opportunity to learn by doing. I believe that every learner deserves an opportunity to share their work beyond the walls of the classroom. And I believe that every learner deserves an opportunity to pursue their passion and purpose during the school day. So just so I can get to know you guys a little bit, and I know some of you have done this with me before, would you mind putting one core belief that you have in the chat? So if you had to say, I believe every learner deserves, how would you finish that sentence? And you don't have to type out the whole sentence. We'll fill in the I believe every learner deserves. What would you say after that? I'm going to give you guys a second to put that in the chat and then we'll move on. These core beliefs, I think, are such a great way to kind of ground us in the learning and to really think through what we believe they deserve so that we know kind of what we need from the learning experience and what you need from this webinar. Jennifer, I love that. An advocate to speak up for them. Advocating for gifted learners is so important, but I think it's so true that every population of learners deserves to have advocates who speak up for them and say, hey, this is what these kids need and deserve from the learning experience. And let's be honest, teachers need advocates too, who stand up and say, this is what teachers need and deserve from the classroom experience. Gosh, Kristen, I love that. The opportunity to face challenges in learning, the opportunity to have their time valued, to take ownership of how they learn, that's huge. And to experience experiences, that is so cool. I like that too. An opportunity to collaborate with other diverse GT learners. These are so good. You guys keep putting them in. I think thinking through this is really, really important. And it's something that we all have core beliefs. And I just think sometimes when we come together to do professional learning, it's a good idea to just say, hey, these are the things we all think every learner needs and deserves. And so as we go through, I would just ask you to consider your core belief and how some of the ideas that we're going to talk about throughout this webinar can align with or support your core belief. For example, one of my core beliefs is that I believe every learner deserves an opportunity to experience new learning, and differentiation is a way to make that happen. So be thinking about your core belief as we go through and think through the connections that you can make to differentiation and your core belief. All right, so let's just start with making sense of this. Like, why does differentiation matter? We all know this, right? This is not, I almost didn't put this slide in because I was like, we all get it. Like, we understand why differentiation is important. But I did recently, I've just started being a plant mom. And look, I am not going to lie, I'm not great at it yet. But I have 3 plants so far, and I have kept them all alive for 2 weeks, and I'm super proud of myself. But here's the deal. They all need different things, right? Some of them need to be watered once a week. Some of them need to be watered every 2 weeks. Some of them need to be watered more often. And I have to keep that in mind because if I treat them all the same, chances are one of them is going to survive, but the other 2 may not. And so knowing each plant, what they need and how I can help them grow is really important. And I think it's the same perspective in the classroom, right? It's just about thinking about our learners and acknowledging that, look, if we treat them all the same, some will grow and some won't. And every learner deserves an opportunity to experience growth, even our gifted learners. I think it's easy sometimes to assume that like, oh, our gifted learners are fine. They're at grade level. So because they're at grade level, I don't have to worry about it, right? I'm just going to kind of make sure they have something to do while I support the others and make sure they're showing growth. And that's a mistake. Like, I think that it's important to say out loud, every learner deserves the opportunity to experience growth, whether that is beyond that grade level or not. It's a really important thing to consider. So thinking about our plants, I don't know if you guys are plant moms, plant dads or not, but it is no easy task. I'll keep you guys updated. I don't know, in a week, I might be telling a very different story about my plants, but for now, they're doing really well. Okay. So this is just kind of an overall perspective. I wanted us to kind of be on the same page when it came to differentiation and what I was talking about. So as you read this definition of differentiation, I would ask you to put in the chat, what are some words that stand out to you? So I'm going to give you a second to read this and think through what are some words here that stand out to you. Oh, thanks, Lauren. Yeah, we'll see how this goes, but I appreciate the support for sure. Oh, Colleen, it's so true that Colleen says in the chat, I can't stand when I hear this is good for all learners. You know, there are so many things that it's like, gosh, there are some things that are good for all learners, but doing it the exact same way for every single learner probably doesn't make sense. So I'm right there with you. I totally get it. Okay, so learning experiences, tailoring, diverse needs. Loretta, that's something that stood out to me too. That idea of just remembering that they all have diverse needs, diverse abilities, diverse interests, which is what makes teaching so hard, right? It's like when you think about my plant analogy, my 3 plants are a little overwhelming right now. If I had 25 plants, um, I would be losing my mind. And so I think about that in the classroom. And I think that's why so often as educators, we get overwhelmed because it is like trying to keep 25 different plants that have different needs alive and growing and having what they need. And it's no easy task. And so one of the things that I don't want to do during this webinar is to minimize that. I recognize that it is difficult and I don't want to make it seem, like, oh, this is easy. That's definitely not the message tonight. I do think there are some things though that we can do to make it a little more intentional, a little more manageable, and a little bit more meaningful. Okay, perfect. You guys shared some great things. So one of the things that I often say about differentiation is that differentiation doesn't mean that everyone gets a different experience, but it means that they experience it differently. And, when I think about my early years in the classroom, when I was a new teacher, I think one of the reasons that I got so overwhelmed in the classroom is that I thought every group needed a completely different learning experience. Like, oh, I'm going to design one thing for this group, one thing for this group, and one thing for this group. And I no longer think that has to be the reality. I think that every learner can have a similar experience. We just have to think through, are there small tweaks we can make to add depth so that they are experiencing it differently? So hopefully that makes sense. I think it will as we go through, and I'm going to share some very specific examples of this a little later on in my presentation. Okay. 8 great graphs of gifted learners. I was actually sharing this with a group of administrators today, and I was talking about how these were created in 1985, y'all. These are not new. If you've heard me share, I talk about them often, but they've been around for a while, and they were created by Judy Galbraith in 1985. And I just wanted to ask you, like, when you look at these 8 great graphs of gifted learners, which number seems like something differentiation could possibly solve? Like, are there any of these numbers where you go, man, if differentiation was a priority, it could potentially solve that gripe of gifted learners? You can just put the number in the chat. I'll give you a second to look at them. There's no wrong answer here. So just which ones of these 8 great gripes do you think differentiation could possibly impact? Okay, perfect. 2. I absolutely think 2 for sure, Heather. Anybody else kind of thinking that one? Or, okay, 6, we feel too different and wish people would accept us for who we are. Lots of 2s. Perfect. The group I was working with today, I was telling them that I think it's a really good idea. Oh, 4. Yeah, I would love, I wish I could see you guys and be with you right now so I could hear your thinking behind each one, because I just love the connections. But I was actually, as I was working with the group today, I was telling them it's not a bad idea to look at these 8 great gripes and maybe think of one of them that you would really like to work on in your classroom, or if you're an administrator, one that you would like for your campus to focus on. I think it's too big of a task to look at all 8 of these and be like, okay, let's solve this problem. Like, that's too overwhelming, and we're probably going to burn out trying to do that. Mary Hicks, how are you? I'm excited that you're here. And yes, I agree, number 8 as well. So when we think about what that looks like, picking one of these 8 great gripes to focus on can be a really great idea. And then aligning it with your core belief, it's good stuff. So I would challenge you to do that. Like, don't feel like you have to tackle all 8 of these, but maybe choose one. And so when I was looking through these are the 3 that I kind of thought differentiation could directly impact. But when I'm looking at your answers, I'm like, oh, that's true. That's true also. Definitely number 2. Number 7, that idea of feeling overwhelmed by the number of things they can do in life. I think thinking about that idea, if there are so many things that you could do, and then you're limited in the classroom to just what they're doing in the classroom, and you're way beyond that, that can be super confining, and it's just not fun. We worry a lot about world problems and feel helpless to do anything about them. We'll talk about that as we get into differentiation, but I'll give you a hint. I think Genius Hour solves this problem a little bit. Okay, so let's just kind of start funneling down into some practical ideas. I think, first of all, it's important to acknowledge that differentiation should be prioritized, right? It should be intentional. appropriate, and meaningful. I think sometimes we forget to prioritize differentiation for gifted learners. We prioritize so many other things. And if we're honest, and I just like to say the things out loud, I think sometimes we forget that gifted learners deserve to be seen and supported in the classroom. And if we don't prioritize differentiation for them, they're going to feel the opposite of that, which is unseen and unsupported. And the ramifications of that is not good. And so we want to make sure that we are prioritizing that differentiation so that they know we thought of them when we were designing the experience. Next is intentional. So I think it's important that we design meaningful extensions and we design for depth as we are designing the experience. I think so often we think about it as an afterthought for our gifted learners, and that can't happen. Intentionality is key. I think that differentiation should be appropriate. I think sometimes there are things that we do, and we're going to talk about those in just a second, that just aren't appropriate. It's not okay to do that to gifted learners. And then number 4, I ultimately think that differentiation should be very, very meaningful. So thinking through those, I'm sure one of them probably stand out to you. And again, I would just ask you to maybe think about one of these that you really want to focus on throughout the school year. All right, some of you have seen this before, but I want to make sure that I say everything that I share tonight, my goal is to make differentiation for gifted learners more manageable and more meaningful. I think a lot of times we present differentiation in a way that it's like nobody can do, it's not sustainable, right? I maybe could do that for a week, but to be able to do that for any amount of time isn't realistic. And so as we work through some of these practical ideas and some of the things that I'm going to share, I would just ask you to kind of consider, is this manageable for me? And if it's not, then maybe you ask kind of, how can I make it so? Or maybe it's just not something that you take from the buffet. I always think of PD as a buffet, and all of our plates are going to look a little bit different. And then I think you also have to ask, is this going to be meaningful for my learners? So that's my goal tonight. It's always my goal with everything that I share with educators, for it to be things that are manageable and meaningful. Okay, so when we're designing an experience, and if you haven't heard me share before, it's important that I clarify. When I say designing an experience, I'm talking about writing lesson plans. I am very intentional about the vocabulary that I use. I don't say writing lesson plans because I just frankly think teachers do more than that. You don't just write lesson plans. You design meaningful learning experiences for your students. And so I just think it's important that we call it what it is. So when we're designing an experience, we have to plan for our learners that don't understand, of course, but I think what it's important to remember is that we also have to plan for those that do. So when you're designing those learning experiences, we want to think all the way through the experience. What am I going to do if they don't understand? How am I going to provide extra support? And what am I going to do if they do understand? How am I going to provide a meaningful extension or an opportunity to reach a deeper understanding? What if my engage piece, as soon as my students come in, what if there's clarity around, oh my gosh, this learner 100% understands the water cycle, and there's nothing that I'm going to offer them today that is going to be new. There has to be a plan in place for what that day is going to look like for them before it actually happens. And I just think so often we think about what we're going to do if they don't understand, but we don't always think about what we will do if they do. All right, you guys, I'm going to say some hard things here, but I think it's important that I say them out loud. We're going to talk about some things, some differentiation ideas that are not okay, and then we'll talk about some differentiation ideas that are okay. First of all, I just want to be honest. I am not a fan of peer tutoring. You may agree with me. You may disagree with me. Some of you may be thinking to yourself, like, peer tutoring, like that's a great way for learners to reach a deeper understanding, right? When they're utilizing the protege effect. Well, here's the problem with that. That's not usually what's happening in peer tutoring. When you put a student who understands it the most with a student who understands it the least, somebody is going to feel burdened. Oftentimes, both of them will. And what I mean by that is if I'm the one being tutored, I feel like a burden. If I'm the one doing the tutoring, I may feel burdened. Do you see what I'm saying? And I don't think that's a culture that we want to create in our classroom. So I am not suggesting that we don't give our learners an opportunity to work together. Annie Mitchell is on here, and I know you heard some of this recently in one of our meetups. And I actually just did my last podcast episode was on this. So if you guys want to actually hear from my personal thought partner, Carrie Espin, we did an episode together, and it was so much fun. So you can go listen to learn more about this idea. But we were talking about making that shift from the idea of peer tutoring to thought partnership, because peer tutoring sounds a little bit, it just doesn't have a good ring to it, I don't think. But I think thought partnership is a really great skill that our learners need. And there's a great website called causeit.org, and they talk about thought partnership. And in their definition of thought partnership, they explain that it is mutually beneficial. And I love that, because that's what I think this should be. If our students are going to work together to support each other or to help each other with a complex or challenging task, we want them to work as thought partners, not as one peer being over the other peer. I just think that sets up a really difficult situation. So Diane, I'm reading your comments. So glad to see the negativity. Yeah, it's an important conversation, I think, for sure. So shifting from peer tutoring to thought partnership. If you want to learn more about that idea, you can go listen to my podcast. It's A Meaningful Mess. You can listen to it anywhere you listen to podcasts. But I do think that's an important conversation. Okay, I'm going to ask real quickly in the chat, what do you guys think about that shift from thought partnership to peer tutoring? Does it make sense? Just yes, no? And pause for just a second and see what you guys think. It's a small shift in thinking. It's not a huge leap. And I just think that it can really start to, perfect, Diane. Thank you for sharing that. And you guys do some reading up on your own around thought partnership and how it's used beyond the walls of the classroom, and how thought partnership is really a skill that our students can utilize well beyond the walls of the classroom. Oh my gosh, it's so true, Roxana, right? Like being in a group where you're doing all the work and everyone else is benefiting from it, not fun. And Loretta, yes, it's a great way to put it. I feel like it just shifts the dynamic. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, you guys probably knew this was coming. Busy work, anything that feels like we're just giving them something to keep them busy while we work with the other learners, can be really frustrating for our gifted learners. Oh my gosh, Colleen, I love that. Hierarchy, for sure. That creating that culture of hierarchy in the classroom is usually not going to end well. Okay, so busy work is insulting, frankly. It's just not okay. And so thinking through that, I wanted to make sure that I said this out loud. Gifted learners recognize and resent busy work. They know when it's happening, and it really creates this idea in them that they aren't seen and they aren't supported. So I think it's important to say out loud to as many colleagues as you can, gifted learners recognize and resent busy work. And so anytime we are tempted to provide busy work, I think we need to remember that and be a little more intentional. And this is what I mean about being appropriate. Busy work is just frankly not appropriate. And then the last thing that I want to say is probably a bad idea is repetition. Like just having them do something to keep them, it's kind of similar to busy work, but like if they can show you that they can, like MDF, right? Most difficult first. If they can show you that they can do the most difficult part of the assignment first, they don't need to show you 25 times that they can utilize that skill or that they have that skill. They need to demonstrate that they can do it and then be given an opportunity to go deeper. So repeating something just for the sake of giving them something to do, probably not a good idea, is going to result in that resentment and is going to give your gifted learners just kind of leave a bad taste in their mouth. All right, so here's some happier slides. Here are some things that I think are a good idea. Number one, I think that differentiation should be connected to content in the classroom. I'm not saying this always has to be the case, but to assume that teachers have to design a completely different project or this huge idea for our gifted learners, I don't think is the case. I think whatever they do as an extension, or whatever they do if they already understand the concept, can 100% be connected to the content that they're learning that day. It's just an opportunity to go deeper. A lot of times I talk about snorkelers and scuba divers and how your snorkelers kind of have to stay up close to the surface. They need more tools. They kind of need to stay close to you, where your scuba divers still are experiencing the ocean, right? We're experiencing the same thing, but your snorkelers, your scuba divers are given a little bit more freedom. They're given that opportunity to explore, but that doesn't mean that it isn't connected to the content. So hopefully that makes sense. It's so hard because I can't see your faces. I think that differentiation should involve meaningful connections, right? Giving our learners the opportunity to think about the connections between what they've learned in class and to what they experience beyond the walls of the classroom, or what they experience in other classrooms, in other content areas. Connections are such an important thing for gifted learners. And the more we can make those connections clear and make them a priority, I think the more our learners are going to benefit. And then obviously, I just think it's important that our gifted learners are given the opportunity to experience new learning. They shouldn't have to learn something over and over and over again. Giving them the opportunity to experience new learning is important, and I just don't think it's that difficult to do. So those are just kind of some big ideas as far as differentiation goes. And now we're going to drill down even further. Okay, I'm pretty proud of this slide, you guys. I'm going to let you watch it one more time. So teachers during independent practice, right? We're like, okay, we're all done. And then our early finishers like pop up out of nowhere. Have you guys ever had that happen? I'm going to pause for just a second and see if I'm alone in that or if that has been your reality before. Like you give them the assignment, everybody's working quietly, and then all of a sudden 2 minutes in, it's like, I'm done. What do I do next? It's just like so stressful. I do monthly. Roxanne, I'm reading your comment. I like that. Very cool. I like that idea of them like leveling up and doing different things. Rachel says, yes, for sure. You've been there. I saw this GIF and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a perfect, it could not be more perfect. This is exactly what it feels like when those early finishers come out of nowhere and you're like, what is happening right now? So first of all, let's just talk about the power of self-assessment and why this is so important. Because this is just an hour webinar, I can only share a few tools and ideas. And I was thinking through like the most meaningful. One of the ways to gain evidence or to know where your learners are and what they need from you is to ask them. Like, I just think so often we try to decide what our students need next. And I don't think that's fair to our learners. And I don't think that's fair to us as teachers. I had a teacher tell me recently that to know what her students need, sometimes she just tries to read their faces. And I'm like, what does that look like? Like, how do you read their faces? I don't even know how that's possible. And I said, that's putting too much pressure on yourself. Like, sometimes we have to put them in the driver's seat, and self-assessment is a great way to do that. So I think there are 4 questions. And I know some of you have heard me share this before, but stay with me because I do have some new stuff. First of all, what did you do well, right? Give them an opportunity to say, hey, this is what I really think I did well as far as this learning experience goes. And then what did you find difficult? And if their answer is consistently nothing or nothing was hard, then really ultimately as a teacher, you know you're not designing for depth. And that's an opportunity for us as educators to kind of reflect and say, okay, I'm not giving them an opportunity to experience productive struggle. I'm not challenging them, and we can start designing different experiences. Here's the most important question. On a scale of 1 to 4, how would you rate your overall understanding? Now, first of all, your learners have to know what understanding of a concept looks like. I'm going to say something here that I don't know if you're going to agree with, and it's okay if you don't, but I've been thinking a lot about objectives, and I've been talking to a lot of schools and admin and teachers about this idea, but we don't differentiate objectives. In other words, we put something up on the board and we say, hey, this is what is expected of everyone today. Well, here's the problem if we're not careful. A lot of times when you put an objective up, if I'm a gifted learner and I come into the classroom and I see that objective, there's like a fly in this room, of course, and it's driving me crazy right now. If I'm a gifted learner and I come into the room and I see an objective and I already know that objective, or I could actually teach it myself, you've lost me before you ever started the learning experience. The same is true for our struggling learners. If a struggling learner comes into the classroom and they see an objective on the board and they don't even understand the vocabulary, they're going to disconnect before they ever have a chance to really kind of gain any movement on that objective. So I'm just suggesting that when you write an objective and you put it on the board, we remember that our gifted learner, just because we put an objective on the board doesn't mean that that's going to be reality, that it's going to magically happen. We have to think through, how can I really intentionally talk through that objective so that my learners know this is what it's going to look like if you've learned this idea. This is what it's going to look like if you have a deep understanding of it. Kind of like that success criteria idea. And then letting them tell you, like on a scale of 1 to 4, here's where I am. And if they're a 1 or a 2, y'all, they need extra support. If they're a 3 or a 4, they need a meaningful extension. And I really do think it's that simple. And I've had people say to me like, well, look, gifted learners are always going to say they're a 3 or a 4. How do we keep them from just saying that? And my answer is always the same. It's like, if your extension is a true opportunity for them to show depth of knowledge or for them to demonstrate that they have a deep understanding of the content, if they actually don't, then they're going to figure out really quickly they should have been a 1 or a 2, or you're going to figure out really quickly that they're not able to complete the extension because they didn't have that they didn't have that deep understanding. And then finally, what questions do you still have? And I like this, y'all, because the next day, this could be their extension. So the next day, maybe they come into class, they finish their work early, and you say to them, hey, okay, you finished your work early. I want you to go look at the form you filled out yesterday, and those questions that you still had, those were some great questions. I want you to spend the rest of today looking for the answers to those or finding the solutions to some of those questions. What do you guys think about that, about using assessment, self-assessment, to kind of tell you what they need as far as differentiation goes and to kind of create their own extension for the next day? All right, I'm going to take a breath and see what you guys think about that. Hopefully that makes sense. I hope that words are coming out of sentences right now. I feel like I'm going really fast. So self-assessment, a great way. I also like this for gifted learners because I say this all the time. I know some of you have probably heard me say it, but I think that sometimes when a gifted parent comes in, and I am a gifted parent, so I can talk about them. Sometimes when we come in and we say something like, hey, can you explain to me why my gifted or advanced learner was working with the struggling group today, or why they didn't get to do the extension? You can pull this out and you can say, because they told me that's what they needed, right? And in my classroom, that's how we operate. I listen to what they need and I give them that as far as the learning experience goes. Okay, so hopefully that's making sense. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lull. So when you guys comment, I don't see it right away. So I will keep watching and hopefully, oh yeah, Mary, that's a great idea to put in their data binder. And they can kind of see growth in their assessment, their self-assessment. You know, I started out maybe not being super honest about my assessment, but then, or about my level of understanding. And then I had to learn how to be more specific. Specific classroom examples. Like Kristen clarified, like, I mean, I think you could use these questions in any classroom. But clarify your question and I'll come back to it for sure. And if nothing else, I will make sure I connect with you afterwards so we can get that question answered. I have students use these ratings all the time. I love how honest they become with practice. Oh, I love that so much. Very cool. Okay. Look, I wasn't going to talk about differentiation and not talk about the depth and complexity icons. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if you haven't heard of these or you aren't using these to differentiate, you're missing a huge opportunity to really design for depth with intention. So the depth and complexity icons were created by Sandra Kaplan and Betty Gould. And basically there are 8 depth icons, 3 complexity icons, and each icon represents a different way of thinking, right? So the first one is language of the discipline. Well, that's not just vocabulary. It's using the language of the discipline in a very specific way. And so then you have unanswered questions and big ideas and trends, ethics, rules. You guys can check these out, but I love this as a springboard for like starting the conversation around differentiation, because I think sometimes when you're designing an extension, it's just kind of like, Where do I go from here? What do I do next? How do I connect whatever we did in class? How do I take that deeper? And these icons are exactly how to do that. Like you take it deeper through unanswered questions, or you take it deeper through the lens of details or patterns. And I just think these are a great springboard, and I think they can be utilized in so many different ways. So if you want to know more about these, depthcomplexity.com is where you want to go. That is J. Taylor Education, and they give away so much for free. So you can get the icons as an extension so that you can utilize them with all of your digital resources. And then there's little short videos for each one of the different icons so that you can learn what it is and how you can use it in your classroom. They give examples, but just a great resource that you definitely want to check out. So this isn't a depth and complexity webinar, but I do think it is something that I would be silly not to talk about it in a differentiation learning experience, specifically for gifted learners. So you guys check that out. Just curious, how many of you are using depth and complexity right now in your classroom? So I'm going to pause for a second and see how many of you are using depth and complexity. Kristen, I was looking at your third grade math. Gosh, I think that would 100% work in a third grade math classroom. Like helping them see, like, okay, if we're covering, maybe you're covering fractions. I don't know. That's probably fourth or fifth grade, but it's been a while. So let's say we're talking about the very basics of fractions. You would say to them, hey, this is what it looks like if you have, if you know what a fraction is, if you have a deep understanding of fractions, it may be an application piece. Like you can apply this idea in this way. So really using that depth of knowledge, level 1 and level 4, and then helping them see that if I can do this, then I may have learned it. But if I can't do this, I may not have a deep understanding of it. So giving them clarity. And the more I think you start to do that, the more they'll understand the difference between just learning something and having a deep understanding, and the easier that'll become. Okay, so lots of people use these. Perfect. And it is a great way to dig deeper. And Loretta, that's exciting that your teachers are receiving training on that this year. I'm a big fan of depth and complexity, and definitely something that you want to consider. Okay, I got to hurry up, y'all. Ideas to share. Okay, I promised in this session, I don't know if you saw the descriptor, but I actually talked about the idea of utilizing AI or artificial intelligence to design for depth or to help with extensions. So how many of you have heard of ChatGPT? Just yes or no in the chat. It is definitely a common conversation right now. ChatGPT is something that so many people are talking about. And again, ChatGPT is just one form of artificial intelligence. So I'm going to pause for a second. Okay, how many of you are using ChatGPT? I guess I should ask that question too. So using it. Okay, so let me show you a couple of ideas, because I was playing around with it this afternoon and I was actually trying to create some ideas. Okay, Amber, Lisa, just so you know, ChatGPT is basically a place where you can go in, you can ask questions, you can ask it to write letters, to write emails. I do want to be very clear. I don't talk about artificial intelligence right now as far as kids using it. Number one, because honestly, I just don't think I know enough about it to be in that lane and talk about it. I also just don't know if we know enough about it yet to letting our students be on it and using it all of the time. So I'm very careful about that. However, thinking about it as far as educators go, I think it can be really beneficial. But a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, we always want to use artificial intelligence ethically. And we want to remember that ChatGPT is not an educator, and it will lie to you with confidence, right? It will say that something aligns or something will work. And you as the educator still have to make those informed decisions. So definitely something to consider. Okay, so I'm going to do something a little tricky here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I am going to share my screen again. Oh, I hope this works. I was super nervous about this. And I'm going to show you in ChatGPT just some different questions that I asked. So first of all, this is what ChatGPT looks like. You guys can see all of my different things that I've searched over here. But I want you to be able to see kind of what this looks like. So you can see here is my prompt. Here's what I typed in. And I said, provide me with 3 tiered assignments for teaching the water cycle. That's just always my go-to because it makes it simple. Each should cater to different readiness levels, advanced, on level, and struggling learners. And you guys can see as I scroll down, here's the advanced learners assignment. Here's kind of the on-level assignment. And then here is something for my struggling learners. So just instantly, I have an idea of what I could do. And what I always tell teachers is like, this is just a really great springboard. So even though you might look at this and go, I don't really like that idea, it may spark something in you that you wouldn't have thought of had you not asked for these ideas. So first of all, what do you guys think about asking it to create tiered assignments? Yes, no, maybe so? What do you think about that? As y'all are sharing in the chat, I'll kind of scroll so you can see. So creating tiered assignments is the first way that I've used this. Oh, yes. And CurryPod is awesome too. I just haven't played around with that as much, but I have heard that it is amazing. Okay, so let me show you the next thing that I did. Next, I asked it to create a choice board for a unit on the water cycle with a variety of activities catering to different learning preferences and abilities. Students can choose activities based on their interests and learning styles. I'm not a big fan of learning styles, but I had actually asked ChatGPT for some prompts, and this was what it gave. So you could change this up a little bit and just take that out and just say, here, can you give me a choice board for, I said, create a choice board for a unit on the water cycle with activities that cater to different learning preferences and abilities. And then it responded. So let me show you kind of what that looked like. So it kind of divides it up. And then I said, can you create this without the learning styles? And so then it just goes through and it gives me a list of ideas that I could utilize for a choice board, which I love. And I actually got it the other day. Terry Ackles, she has a great blog called Engage Their Minds. If you don't know Terry, she does amazing work in gifted education. And she actually had it create, she said, can you create it in the form of a menu? So can you create a choice board in the form of a menu with appetizer, main dish, and dessert? And then you guys, she used Canva. She went and found a menu on Canva and she copied and pasted the choice board with the appetizer, main dish, and dessert. She copied and pasted that into the menu in Canva and had this amazing choice board that looked like a legit menu that you would get at a restaurant. So I love that idea. It makes it super simple. And this ChatGPT can just, again, give you some of those ideas that you may not be able to think of on your own. So what do you think about using it as choice board ideas? And look, this is a lot of choices. I've been saying to teachers a lot lately, like 2 choices is a choice. I think Ian Bird was the first person I ever heard say that, but you don't have to have 9 choices. That can sometimes be overwhelming, but you could pick the 2 out of this list that you think would be most meaningful to your learners and have them pick between the 2. 2 choices is a choice. I think it's important to say that out loud. What do you guys think about using it to create choice boards? Does that make sense? Can you see how meaningful that would be? I'm going to pause for just a second and see what you guys think about that. Okay, sometimes there's a stall, so I'm going to keep talking and you guys can put your comments in the chat. All right, and the last thing that I put into ChatGPT was I asked it to generate learning extensions for the water cycle that incorporate the depth and complexity icons, which we just looked at. And I asked it to provide activities or questions that would encourage learners to think critically, deeply, and think about complex ideas within that subject matter. And so you can see here, as I scroll down, it took the ethics icon, big ideas, pattern, and it just gives us a quick idea. And again, I just think it is a great springboard. And sometimes really being specific with ChatGPT and saying, okay, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So not just, Can you create an extension? But can you create an extension utilizing the depth and complexity icons can be really meaningful. So putting those two things together can just 100%, Lauren, make it so much more manageable for teachers. Again, it's important to think through these activities. You know, it may not always get it right. It may have an activity that goes with trends that may, if you really understand the icon, isn't the reality. But it is a great springboard and a great place to start. So I wanted to make sure that I showed you guys that. Another thing that I wanted you to see is, let me go here because I'm going to try to, let me see if I can get back to our presentation. Okay, share screen. This is good. Okay. All right. So let me go here. So here are, if you want to take a picture of that, these are the prompts that I use to get those specific responses, or to get it to give me the things that it did. So if you wanted to take a picture of that, there is that slide. And the next thing that I wanted to share with you is a tool called Diffit. So in the chat, if you will just tell me if you've heard of Diffit, yes or no, that'll kind of give me some idea on how long we need to spend on this tool. So diffit.me, is that something you guys are using? Have you heard of it? Oh, yay, Roxana hasn't heard of it. I really wanted to be the first person to share this one with some of you guys. So lots of no's. Okay, I'm excited. I'm going to show this to you. I love this so much. So let me stop sharing again. Let me open a new tab and do diffit.me. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I always say there's this great meme that says, if you don't make an announcement that you shared your screen, did it really happen? Okay, so hopefully you guys can see. We just tell me in the chat, can you see my screen where it says get leveled resources for? So I love this. And even if you teach math or you don't teach reading, like I would encourage you to think about this from your perspective. And I'll tell you how that can happen in just a second. So first of all, this gives you an opportunity to think through leveled resources. So you can see on the screen, it says literally anything, an article, or any text or excerpt. So what that means is I can go in here and let's say, let's just stick with our, like we've been talking about the water cycle all night. Let's just say I want something for my learners to read about the water cycle. If I was doing an article in Wonderopolis, I would click article and copy and paste the link here. Or any text or excerpt, I could copy and paste here for sure, or upload a PDF. Are you with me? So let's say water cycle, and then I can go here and I can say what grade level I would like for this to be on. So I can go from second grade all the way to 11th grade and up. So I'm going to say third grade. Actually, let's say fifth grade. Generate resources. Now, this is going to take a second, so I'm just going to kind of talk you through this. What it's going to do is it is going to create that whatever topic I've asked on that reading level. I love this because your learners can all read about the same topic, same content, but they can have it on different grade levels, which I think is very cool. So hopefully you guys are kind of intrigued by this idea, but it gets better. So, okay, let me show you kind of what you can do now. So here's the reading passage. It's going to give me not only the reading passage, but also a summary, some vocabulary words, and then some multiple choice questions, short answer questions, and open-ended prompts. All of those things it gives you just from saying water cycle. So far, what do you guys think about it? Like just knowing that it creates the actual content and the different types of questions. Are you on board? Like, are you excited? What do you think so far? There's more. It's like the whole commercial, like, but wait, there's more. Okay, so look at this. You're going to love this so much. So right here under multiple choice, but let's just do short answer questions. I can say add questions, and look, you guys, I can be specific about what types of questions I want. So like, you know, I may want some basic comprehension, but I also might want some extended thinking, right? For my advanced and gifted learners or my kids who just already understand the content. So I might say, hey, I want 3 extended thinking questions, and it's going to generate 3 new questions that fit that depth of knowledge. What do you guys think about that? Like very, very cool. I love this as kind of like training wheels for us as educators to learn how to ask better questions. I know that when I was in the classroom, sometimes I was just like, "Can you give me an example? Like, how should I write that question? What should I say?" And I think that this is a great way for us as educators to see some of those questions, so that when we are expected to do it on our own, we have some experience. Now, I want to share one other really cool idea with you, and I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. Yesterday, one of my colleagues, Josh Essery, was using this tool, and he was trying to use it with YouTube. And I guess he was thinking through kind of how to make that happen. And he did the most amazing thing. He took the transcript from YouTube. So when you are watching a YouTube video, you can get the transcript from that video. He got the transcript, and then he copied and pasted that into Diffit, and he had Diffit create questions about that YouTube video using the transcript, which I thought made so much sense. I was like, that's a great way to create leveled questions for the YouTube videos that our learners are watching as well. So what do you guys think about using it with YouTube, using it with something like Wonderopolis or a website, or really any content that they can read? I just love that you can decide on the grade level, the reading level, and then the fact that you can choose those leveled questions is huge and super beneficial. Yes, that was worth it, right? That was worth the whole hour right there. Okay, we're getting close to being done, but let me show you just a couple of more things. Let me go back to my slides. That's not what I want. Okay. Okay. So diffit.me is where you want to go to. And this is a tool that is in beta, and I haven't used it a ton, but I definitely wanted you guys to know about it so that you can play around with it and see if it's something you think would be meaningful in your classroom. Okay, sometimes I think we avoid doing tiered assignments or tiered stations. Like, I think sometimes if we understand how to manage it, the stations that we do in our classroom can be tiered. Like, hey, at this station, if you have a deep understanding of the content, this is what you're doing. If you're kind of just starting out, this is what you're doing. But I think one of the reasons we don't do that is because it's like, Andy, what would that look like? How would I ever give directions for all of those different learning opportunities? And I think that's true even with tiered assignments. Like, it's hard enough to give one set of instructions, but to have to give 2 sets of instructions or 3 sets of instructions, we would never get to actually doing the work. And so I wanted to share with you guys that I'm a big fan of using video in the classroom to clone yourself. And what I mean by that is you can go into Microsoft Flip and you can click on camera and record a video of yourself giving explicit instruction of whatever you want your learners to do. So let's say you have an assignment in your classroom that your kids are going to do. And in class, you're going to give the directions for that assignment. That's fine. But if you're going to have a way for your students to level up, or maybe the differentiation piece is they're going to do something a little bit differently, but you're not going to have time to give the directions for that, record a video of yourself giving those directions. And when you give your learners the assignment, there could be a QR code with that assignment that they could scan and watch with their mobile devices. You could have in the LMS in your Google Classroom or in your Schoology, they could go in and they could watch the video. Like, you don't have to do it live anymore, right? You could record the video for that next level up. And if your students are doing that one, instead of giving those directions in class, just make sure you give explicit instruction in that video and tell them they can watch that video as many times as they need to, so that they know what they need to do if it's different than what the rest of the class is doing. I just think so often we don't differentiate because we think we're not going to have time to explain it. And I think we forget that we can use video to, like I said, kind of clone ourselves and say, okay, if you're doing this assignment, this is what you're going to do. If you're doing this assignment, this is what you're going to do. What do you guys think about that, utilizing video to give a different set of instructions, or just talking about how they're going to tweak it a little bit or do it a little bit differently to show that they have a deep understanding of the content, or to reach a deep understanding of the content? Yes, no, maybe so. Or I muted myself. Around the idea of using video, does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll watch for your comments for sure. Okay, so I told you guys earlier, okay, yay, I'm so glad that made sense. I was like, words are coming out. Oh, they're coming out of sentences. Okay, I told you guys that I was going to talk about that idea when I made that statement of differentiation doesn't mean that everyone has to experience something differently. It means that they experience it. They don't always have to do something different, but they can experience it differently. Yes, Heather, smarter, not harder, for sure. Okay, so think about this. Let's say your students come in and they're going to be learning about the water cycle. And you have 2 or 3 students who not only know about the water cycle, but they could actually teach the other learners something. I love the idea of having those learners either create a video game in Scratch, right? You don't have to know how to use Scratch. They can figure it out. Write a book in Book Creator, or create a Google site for their peers to use. So it's not everybody's going to get to use the resource. Everybody's going to use Scratch. Everybody's going to use Book Creator, and everybody's going to use Google Sites. They're just going to use it differently. So let me be real specific here. So a kid comes in, they already understand the water cycle. Hey, I see you. I want to make sure that I give you something that is meaningful for you, but also manageable for me. So while we do the water cycle assignment, I wondered if you could go into Scratch and create a video game for the rest of the class to play. So the student who has that deep understanding is going to create the video game. They're going to produce it. And your other learners are going to actually play the video game that they create so that they can learn more about the water cycle. So it's almost like the whole thought partnership, protege effect, but it's not me sitting in front of another student and giving them the answers. And same in Book Creator. They're going to write a book in Book Creator for the rest of the class to read, or they're going to create a Google site for the rest of the class to visit. So I just like that idea of using these ideas of like, if they have a deep understanding, they may do more producing. And until they get that deep understanding, they may do more consuming, just in this specific example. I don't think that's always the right way to do it, but I do think in this specific example, that's one way to make that happen. Okay, you guys knew we were going to talk about this, right? I think that Genius Hour is a great extension. I love the idea of like introducing Genius Hour to your whole class and doing the passion and purpose part of Genius Hour together. We're all going to identify our passion. We're going to come up with a purpose statement. And then you creating a place where, again, there are videos to explain the rest of the process. And those projects are always just running in the background. So anytime there's free time in class, anytime they finish their work early, anytime you guys have time that you didn't expect to have, those Genius Hour projects are always there, just kind of hanging out in the background for your learners to work on. If you want to know more about Genius Hour, you can visit my website, andymcnair.com, and click on Genius Hour in the navigation bar. There is no shortage of resources. I would also encourage you to follow me on Instagram. That's where I share most about Genius Hour, but I am never going to talk about differentiation and not talk about Genius Hour as an option, because it just makes so much sense to me. So through Genius Hour, you can make connections to content. Your learners are practicing those life-ready skills, and you're giving them that opportunity to pursue their passion and purpose. Okay. Gosh, you guys, that was fast and furious. My contact information is here, so you want to make sure you check that out. Please follow me on Instagram. If you have any specific questions tonight that I didn't get a chance to answer, you can always email me. My email address is there. My website is andymcnair.com. You will get a follow-up email from me with a recording of this webinar and with some additional information and some things you might want to check out. So you can look for that probably tomorrow. Probably not going to happen tonight, because I'm about to get myself a Dr. Pepper and watch Survivor and Amazing Race. So I just appreciate you guys so much. Thank you so much for being here. Y'all get some rest tonight for sure. Thanks for spending your evening with me. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. All right. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye, y'all.